it's something I actually kind of like this language. And so indulge me for a few minutes, and I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the features of Python. When my first exposure to Python was through a web applications framework called Zope some time back. And when I was at the University of Tulsa, we put together our site in Zope, and as far as I know, it's still up and still running. And that was sort of a backdoor introduction to Python. When you were doing Zope, you sort of felt like Python was something you could get to, but they didn't make that part of it particularly easy. In Django, on the other hand, Python is sort of front and center. It's a core part of what you're doing in the application. So before we get too far into this, here's how some people feel about Python, the programming language. This is a webcomic called XKCD. If I get really boring, just start hitting the random button in XKCD, and I'll know from the chuckles that you're doing that, and that'll be great. Python, I learned it last night. Everything is so simple. Hello world is just print, quote, hello comma world, exclamation mark, quote. I don't know, dynamic typing, white space. We'll talk about white space in a minute. Come join us. Programming is fun again. It's a whole new world up here. And you can read faster than I can talk. But Python is a lot of fun. It's enough fun that I do want to show you just a little bit. Look, I'll do a quick example of a couple of different kinds of Python programs. They're on this wiki page down here. Here's a very simple Python program. We're going to pull it up as a text page. I hope everyone can read that. There's a little bit of a scan converter thing going on here, but I hope you all can read it. And I want to talk to you really briefly about what a basic Python program does. If you can't see it from up here, you can visit the wiki page and look at it on your own screen if you have one. This is the classic guess a number between 1 and 10. I want to go back to something else. I'm a hobby programmer. I am not. There are some people in this room who are really good at this stuff. I'm not. But I want to take you through a couple of steps here. One of the things, I just want you to kind of look at the overall look of the language. One of the things that you will notice is there are no curly braces in this, unless I'm defining a list, but there are no curly braces to mark code blocks, and there are no semicolons at the end of every line. Python strives for simplicity and readability. There is not more than one way to do it in Python. There is a way to do it in Python that's been really thought out. Some people find that constraining, and some people find it somewhat liberating, especially if you don't do a lot of programming. It's nice when you go back months later and look at your code and you can still read it. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this real quickly. What I've done is it's a guessing game after all, right? So I've imported a module called random. You see import random here. Here's how I'm going to declare a variable. Secret equals random.randrange 1 to 11. Starts at 1, ends before 11. So there's a number. Here's some more variables, your guess, turn. And here's a list. Python supports lists, dictionaries, all the standard things that one would expect. Wrap everything up in a try block. You all who are Java programmers may be familiar with the idea of try except blocks. Exception handling is the goal here. The reason that I do that is because I'm doing something really crude in this program, and if you hit Control-C or Control whatever your end of file character is in your OS, I don't want it to throw an error. While your guess doesn't equal the number 99, again, note the lack of extra stuff. And not any extra parens there. And no opening curly brace. There is a colon. There's no closed colon, though. So there. Increment the turn counter. Turn equals turn plus 1. Here's an example of something Python does very well. String interpolation. Print turn number, string S, semicolon previous guesses, string S. interpolate the current value of turn and guesses into that string. Pretty straightforward. Some string concatenation. So you see how that works. Here's a string. I'm calling something called raw underscore input, which, as you might expects input off the keyboard. That comes in as a string. We want to convert it to an integer. Remember, we're guessing a number. And I hit a nice new line at the end. If your guess is less than 1 or greater than 10, and your guess is not equal to 99, blah, 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 try again. If your guess equals secret, print, yay, you won, good for you. And you hit a key to exit, and you exit out of this loop, and go on. And it gives you some tips. You know, if the secret is bigger than your number, it says guess higher. Secret is lower, it says guess lower. And that's it. It says thanks for playing. I wrote a little screen clearing thing for the next little version. This is a simple Python program that's a little more than the hello world. So I wanted you to get a sense of what loops look like in Python, what exception handling looks like in Python, how you assign variables, how you manage that. You may have noticed there are no functions or anything defined in there. So we're going to look at another program for those of you who are used to doing object-oriented stuff. This is a grossly oversimplified object-oriented simulation of the tenure process. Here's a little clear screen thing. Okay, so we're going to define class members. Class member is a class, an object class. How many of you do some object-oriented programming? A few. Great, a third of you. You know, you have classes of objects. An object has, generally, these attributes, and then it has methods, and then you have instances of each individual object. Because I'm old, I map all this stuff to database terminology. You know, we have the database schema, and we have database records. But anyway, this is the schema. We're going to define a new class called FactMember. I give some comments. This is really nice because in the Python interactive interpreter, you can say help FactMember, and it'll spit this out to help you remember what was going on. Every time we instantiate or create a new faculty member in this simulation, hire a new faculty member, we have to supply a name, an office location, and a phone number. Okay, and the name of the instance equals name, the office equals office, the phone equals phone, and I tack on a couple of things. Books published, 0. Tenured, false. Okay, down here we're going to say how do objects like faculty members get represented. If I just want a list of all my faculty members, what do I want to see? And the way that I chose to do this is just to spit out a little CSV comma separated list of their room number, what have I got here? Name, their room number, their phone. If they're tenured, they get a star. Okay? If they're not tenured, they don't get a star. Now, each faculty member has some behavior associated with him or her. She can publish a book. Whenever she publishes a book, her book published goes up by 1. They're going to see the plus equals 1. This is just a little shorthand. It could have been books published equals 1 plus books published. And then we have tenure review, which is a process that happens to the faculty member every so often. And if books published is greater than or equal to 5, they get tenure. This is not indicative of any kind of real world activity. This is just for fun, and it was something I came up with. So you're stuck with it, sorry. Okay, here's the main loop of the program. Python has a neat trick where if the name equals main, that means you invoked it from the command line, and you want to execute everything that follows after this. If you load this program, you can just access the functions that we defined earlier, class definitions, in your own programs. So here's what happens. We're going to hire some new faculty members. Okay, think of this as a process. When I hire a new faculty member, I instantiate a member of the FactMember class. So here's Adam 12, who's been assigned to M520. He's got a phone number. We print them out. Here's Kim Jones. She's over there. Melanie Strauss, so on. So we pause that for a minute, and now let's look at how these instances get acted on in the real world. By the way, in a lot of standard books, this would be the pizza kitchen example. It's used often a pizza kitchen example. You cook pizzas. Fact 3 is publishing something. Fact 2, fact 3, fact 3, fact 1. Fact 3 is just going at it. Fact 3, if you remember Melanie Strauss, she's publishing left and right. We go in here and we change her, we change some phone numbers and some locations. Here's a list of faculty. Remember I mentioned that Python has lists. And then here's the annual review. Imagine this happening at some point in their career. For each person in that list, do the tenure review, which fires off the function, which checks, did they publish more than 5 books? And if they publish more than 5 books, it changes their tenure status. Then we do some reports. We spit out a CSV file, and we spit out a pipe delimited file. What I was trying to do in a very, very basic way is simulate some of the operations you might do on a body of data that you might run across in your practice. And this is sort of the Python way of doing that sort of thing. So if you're used to Perl's object syntax, or if you're used to PHPs or C++s, this is a little bit different. Those are up there on the wiki. You can take a look at them and play with them. And the reason I think it's important to look at that a little bit is, as I said, Django is very Python-centric. It's a web framework built on top of Python, not the other way around. They don't try to hide the Python from you. And I've got a terminal window here somewhere, and we'll be popping it open in a minute. Any questions so far? Okay. A couple of things that I wanted to mention before we go into the Django part of this. Super brief intro to Python. Okay. Let me talk about some resources, and then you really can go back to reading XKCD. Mr. Bruce was giving me grief about this earlier. Learning Python, I still am. Learning Python is a classic O'Reilly tome, no pictures, a lot of pretty dense stuff. My edition's old. It's Python 2.3. The current version of Python is 2.5, and I think there's a 3rd edition of the book out. It's really very well done. It's excellent. The second thing, if you get interested in Django, just so I don't forget to mention this, this book is actually just terrifically good. And this is the definitive guide to Django from A Press, and it's written by Holovati and Kaplan Moss, who are the benevolent dictators for life of Django. And it's just really excellent. Their background is in journalism, and the quality of writing is just much superior to what one might usually expect from an open source project. The book is, and we'll go to it in a little bit, but the book is available online. And for free. Again, I actually prefer my reference books in hard copy, but you could save some trees by going online. One of the lovely things about the online book, and it ties into some of the stuff that some other people are doing out there in the world, is it has a commenting system that's tied to each paragraph of the book. And sometimes if you don't understand what's going on in the book, you can visit the online section, discover there are 8 comments about that paragraph, and learn that maybe the way that it came out in the Dead Tree version of the book was actually not quite correct. Something else that was just in my bag. If any of you do a lot of work with Linux, see if you can get your institution to Spring for Linux format. You may be stuck with dusty old drab Linux journal, which is another Linux mag. Linux format is from the UK, and it's too expensive to buy if you're an individual. I think each copy is $17 or something. It comes with a DVD, but But if you can get your institution to Spring for Linux format, it's an outstanding magazine to help you keep up with Linux. We run Django on a Red Hat server, or a CentOS rather, a CentOS server. You can run it on most flavors of Linux and on Mac OS and things like that. Okay, back to the regularly scheduled program. Our goal with this dashboard was to aggregate a bunch of information that we were getting from PeopleSoft. The university has a gigantic investment in PeopleSoft. We have no access to PeopleSoft at an API level or even at a query writer level. We can request canned reports. Does anybody else have this relationship with their central IT authoritative data source? You know, just that's where we are. So we get CSV files or Excel files. And what it is the result of a bunch of relational queries so that you might get 3,700 rows. John's here, I should say that correctly. It is the relational product of a set of queries. So you get 3,700 rows showing a separate row for every student in every class and every student, class, and instructor. And so we wind up with some data we have to weed through. And our original goal was to take that data, get that on the web, and then also make it so that the faculty could do a couple of things. I'm not trying to compete with a point link and their seating chart stuff, but I did want a picture directory of the students. I wanted a way for the faculty to send quick one-off communications to students in their class, because often we get requests for setting up mailing lists that are only used once a year, or once a semester, for a class cancellation or something like that. And it would make much more sense for them to have a box to fill in, send an email, and communicate with the faculty that way. And so I'll show you the end result. The end result, by the way, is not this ugly. I stripped out the style sheet. Okay, and the reason that I did that is just because the colors looked like they weren't going to show up very well at all on this screen. But anyway, let's start with the end result, and then I'll work back. Okay, and remember, we start out with this spreadsheet with the 3,800 rows, and we're going to work our way back to an application that was useful. And again, I want to point out, this is a very small thing. This is not this is not a gigantic project. This is a little project, but it seemed to add some value. Okay, so once you log in, and authentication is handled via LDAP. There's a middleware plugin for Django that handles LDAP. And so once you're authenticated, it handles LDAP and it handles fallback authentication if you don't have an entry in LDAP, which is valuable for adjunct faculty members who never remember their usernames and passwords because they're not as closely connected to the law school as our regular users. And so we have a kind of a shared username and password for them. Anyway, so we've had we've logged in the LDAP, and then we have a class list. My goal, again, is just throwing up something as simple as I can that shows a bunch of people. Here we have a seminar in Advanced International Negotiations being taught by Professor Zwier. I can get a class list, I can get an instructor list, I can get a student list. We had to put some notes up here about people who are having trouble finding their classes and some things like that. Here I have, nice, here I have a twitchy mouse, or a twitchy presenter. Okay. I have 5 actions that I can take with these students. I can email all the students. No attachments permitted yet. I would like to say that was a philosophical choice. Rather, that reflects the limitations of the carpenter. I should be able to do it, I just can't. Download a list of all students, includes name and email, CSV format. One of the nice things this is showing you is that the templating language, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is just as happy to spit out text as HTML, or to call a PDF generator like Report Labs PDF generator as called CSV. We have a quick list of student emails to cut and paste to another program. We have a formatted request for a law school class mailing list. We use Mailman to manage our class mailing lists. And what you would get would be a phone call or an email saying, I need a list for torts. Thank you. You know, and what this does, you'll see in a minute, is it loads up the data a little bit to make it easier to create a Mailman list. Requesting a Blackboard class site. Blackboard is our class management system. Just out of curiosity, how many of you all use Blackboard? How many of you all use there we are. He's anticipating my next question.
We're changing.
Oh.
Yeah, to
Desire to learn?
No, Moodle.
Oh, excellent. Okay. How many of you use Blackboard extensively? That number dropped significantly. We would be in that first group. We have a lot of Blackboard, a big investment, a significant investment in Blackboard, but it's not being used. And I don't know, I've played with Moodle, but anyway, one of the things I would like to do is encourage my folks to request Blackboard sites so we make that possible. Anyway, here's a display, alphabetical order of all of our students. I beg your pardon, all the students in this particular class. All right? So we've linked up to the big store of JPEGs we have from their ID photos, and we're displaying that here. We have a few other things we can do with it. To email all students, you have this contact form, your email, the subject, and I'm already going to paste in the class name and ID. Hopefully they don't filter immediately to trash. If you check a box, you can actually permit students to reply. If you uncheck the box, you get one of these no reply at law.emory.edu kinds of things. And you can send a message. The messages are all archived after they're sent to deal with people's concerns that maybe they didn't send something to someone, or student concerns that maybe the faculty member failed to communicate with them. So that's one. Download a list of all students, including name and email. Trust me, this is a CSV file. It's trying to pop up Excel, and I don't want to take time for Excel to load, but there is a CSV file coming out of that. The quick list of student emails is a plain file that they can cut and paste into Outlook, and goes on from there. Now, let's look at request a law school class mailing list. We'll come back to this in a little bit. This is sort of interesting in that I've got a bunch of instructions here that are really for my staff about what they need to do at the command line to set up this mailing list. We've just pasted in a bunch of text along with a list of all of the students who are in the class. There are better ways to do this, but this is the first step in automating the process of creating mailing lists. And by using this tool, we cut down on the phone calls back and forth to the faculty member, to their assistant, asking them for more information about the class.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
Is this coming, all this data being drawn directly from the database, or is it a batch process that comes?
That's a great question, again, because we don't have live access to the data. What we do during the enrollment period is we pull the data every day at 11 into a CSV file, and if you all are interested, I wasn't planning on talking about it, there's a separate Python program that calls up the Django API, loads all the updated data. And so yes, it's absolutely a batch process. And another reason why we want to drive people towards Blackboard is because Blackboard is one of the few applications on campus that is directly wired into PeopleSoft. And so if they were using Blackboard, very little of this would be necessary, if everyone was using Blackboard. But again, because our uptake on the Blackboard side has been pretty slow because people don't find it appealing for whatever reason, you wind up using things like this. So here is this fellow. We click on information. We find out that he's currently enrolled in admiralty, business associations, courtroom persuasion, franchise law, product liability. Wow. And advanced international negotiations. He was very busy. So what we're also trying to do is give the faculty a bit more information about who their students are, what they're up to. But as all of you can kind of guess, what's happening here is we're just connecting three tables. The classic sort of three tables, classes, students, and faculty. We're just connecting them together in a bunch of different ways and then making that information available via the web. All right? So this is the application, starting from the end. The input to the system, as I said, is a CSV file. The output is this multi-table relational database, various web forms and pages, create, read, update, delete functionality via the Django administrative interface. I can already tell I'm not going to have time probably to talk about this. One of the absolute great things about Django is that as soon as you define a database model and a URL for that database to point at, the view function for that, you can have other people entering data into your database via a nice web interface. Okay? This is a terrific time saver. As Rich is pointing out, however, in our case, that would be not what you wanted, because unfortunately we need to get all of this data directly from the university, the authoritative university system. And so we're batch loading it all. But if you think about all of those other little systems that you manage around the law school, address lists, faculty research assistants, clinic students, people who are around, or things that you need to track, you may not really need a public-facing web interface. What you may need is the back end that allows them to get that data into the system no matter where they are around the building. That all makes sense. And if all of this is like, just seems like too much, there is a commercial product out there, has nothing to do with Python or anything like this, but is the best thing we found for web-enabled databases, and that's QuickBase. QuickBase is made by Quicken, and it is just an example. It's an example of how nice a Web 2.0 style app can be. Just as an FYI, with our educational discount, 100 users on QuickBase and 250 megs of file storage, I think costs us $400 a month, which is either a lot or a little, depending on where you are and the kinds of things you're trying to accomplish. We use it to track leave requests. We use it to track some inventory stuff. We do some planning stuff in QuickBase, other things like that. Things where I want a business analyst in the CFO's office to take the thing and run with it. But we need data entry from more places than might happen if we were using Access. One of the reasons that I got into QuickBase was to avoid creeping access. We had valuable data being stuck in Access databases in personal computers and laptops around the building. And QuickBase helps with that. So if this is too much, take a look at QuickBase. Okay, what you do with Django, you download, you install it, you configure it, you work your way through the Django tutorial, which is really great. Then you're ready to define your models. The very first thing that you get is one of these It Worked pages. They do a good job of getting that out to you right away to try to convince you there won't be any work after that. Of course, all the real work's about to start. The very first thing you do is create a new project. You do Python start project, in this case fact tenure. Is anybody experimenting with Ruby on Rails? Okay, this should be familiar to you if you've done the Ruby on Rails kind of dance. It creates a folder. Underneath the folder are going to be a number of housekeeping files and some almost empty templates for you to start playing with. Comes with a development server. Just one of the most wonderful little things about this. Again, I think this is a kind of a Ruby on Rails feature as well, or Zope for that matter. Python manage.py start server. kicks up a local server on, by default, port 8000 on the local machine. Edits to any of your files get automatically reloaded so that you can see them in the server. It makes for a very convenient editing environment as you're playing around with things. Also, their error messages are really, they're good. They're helpful, actually. The key files in a Django application, something called settings.py, that has sort of site-wide settings, including things like how to access your database. As far as database access, by the way, your choices are currently Postgres, MySQL, or SQLite, SQLite 3. The last one, the SQLite 3, makes for a very nice, quick setup. You can immediately start playing around with that because that's built in. It basically comes with Python. We have a file called models.py, which is anything and everything about your data. Views, a little bit different from the view in the MVC sort of terminology. Views also include the functions that apply business logic. There are these weird arguments, because there are not that many people who use either framework, between TurboGears people and Django people about MVC stuff. URLs.py. One of the things you're going to see here is a lot of loose coupling. Any function in your Python program should be able to be assigned to any URL. Right? That's an important thing. There is no correspondence between files in the file system or program names or function names and the URL that calls them. This is very helpful. If you're maintaining let's say, a bilingual site, for example, or there are lots of other reasons when it becomes very useful. Then you have a template. You have a template language, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second. All right, here's a model. Finally, you're like, my God, 35 minutes. Here's a model. The idea with Django development is that you don't define the database insert commands, the database schema. You don't do the inserts, the updates, the alters, the deletes. You don't do that. The framework does that for you. You define a Python object. You remember before we were talking about fact member as being an object class. We're going to define a class in this one, and this comes straight out of the application I did. We have a class called law instructor that inherits from the Django models.model class. It has a primary key called impl_id, which is a character field, and it has a maximum length. Max length 20, character field, impl_id. Full name is full name, max length 20. Blank equals false. In other words, in this application, you cannot have a blank full name for a faculty member, which makes sense. It's a constraint. Mail, models.email field. Email is the name that we're using for it. Maximum length 50, blank equals true. You can have a faculty member without email. Okay? Then if we want to display the object back to the world or back to the web page, we have to choose a way to display something other than object 47. Or like in my grossly oversimplified example, you had fact2, and you're like, okay, who's fact2? That's Melanie somebody. In this case, we define a way to represent the model, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to return the full name of the person. So every time we see, this particular, we call this object, we're going to get that name back. Views.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Previous slide.
Uh-huh.
You say the full name could be blank?
No, it says blank equals false. The full name cannot be blank.
Email can.
Email can be blank.
Oh.
We don't always know the email address of the faculty member.
Isn't most of that defined in your SQL database? Why do you define it within Python?
I haven't touched my SQL database. I have no idea what the backend store is going to be at this point.
Okay.
And so, which is sort of the flip side of your question, because I think a whole lot of us are trained to begin these projects with a create, a definition in SQL before we do anything else. Where that becomes a hindrance is if you're going to start out using SQLite 3 and you migrate through MySQL and then you migrate on to MS SQL or whatever. There are variances in the dialects of SQL, and it's really nice to have the framework handle all that for you. So when I mentioned that this is a Python-centric framework, that's kind of the nut of it right there. We didn't start with SQL. We started with Python, if that makes sense. Okay? That's a great question, and it is one of these things that's like, okay. Because here's your next one, where you're going to look at this and you're going to go, why are you going through these contortions when you could just write some SQL and look at this? Okay, so here's a view. Okay, I've defined a function called instructors that's going to act on an HTTP request. Take it as a given that the framework provides us this request object that I can do things with. And I've written some information about it. So law instructors equals law instructor dot objects dot all. Okay, you guys can imagine what that query is. Select star from law instructor. Order by, order underscore by. This is where the SQL person goes, oh, okay, order underscore by, full name. So I want everybody out of the database in order by their full name, okay? And I want all of the fields available. And that's going to be supplied to something called law instructors. That is exactly the part where a lot of SQL folks would say, I've been doing order by X DESC for a long time, and I know that I know how to do that. And this lowercase, especially with the little underscore in between the order by, just bugs me. There are trade-offs. All right, but there are benefits, and here's the benefit. Return, so this is the function return. Return, render to response. Law classes slash instructors, sorry about the wrapping, instructors.html with a dictionary getting called, right, a list of things, a dictionary named law instructors that's actually law instructors, every object in that law instructors query. And I also want it to have a bunch of context around it which has to do with the request that I submitted. Okay? Then I've wrapped it all in something I still don't understand. I just kind of take this on faith. In something called a decorator. Decorators are new in Python 2.4. And a decorator applies something around an entire function. And in this case, in order to do a query on my instructors, you guys can read this, right? It's instructors, there's a login required. And that's what would require you to have authenticated to our LDAP box before you could even view my list of instructors. So in this view function, especially those of you coming out of other language frameworks, you would say that's a lot more than just the view that's happening there. You're looking for something that's more like a template. And instead, we're doing an SQL query behind the scenes. We're organizing some stuff, and we're passing big blobs of data off to something else. And what we're passing it off to is the template image. Before I get there, I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the URLs are a big pile of regular expressions that map functions to URLs. Okay? URLs.py. Let's look at the template language that's going to render that illustration of the information we just passed along. The template language supports inheritance. There's a base template called generic. The template language uses curly braces followed by percent signs to demark the tags. And it uses doubled curly braces for fields. Every template language has its own oddities, and some people will be annoyed by this. We have a block. In my base template, I've defined blocks, which are just empty spots. There's a base template that has a block title that's empty, and there's a base in the base template. There's a content block that's empty. This is taken out of the Django book because they had the highlighting. Anyway, block content, we throw up a section title wrapped in H1s, and then you get this. For story in story list, one of those lists we're passing around, think of all faculty, href equals, get the absolute URL of the story. Here they're throwing out a headline and they're processing it. It has about 30 different ways you can process things that get returned in the template. In this case, you're making it uppercase. Then they wrap that all in the H2, and you have the story tease, another attribute of the story object. Truncated words is truncated to 100 words. And you're in the block. Okay, the whole thing, boy, I'm sorry. Oh man. The whole thing, we wound up with these kinds of line counts. There are 3 files that I had to edit. Models.py has 90 lines in it. The URLs, which define the different URLs that people have to go to, has 27 lines in it. And views, which is where the fun stuff is happening, has 239 lines. That was to generate the app that I was showing you earlier. Doesn't include the templates, of course. Let's go one more. Now let's take a little bit of a look at the code. Questions? We have questions? No. Okay. All right. This is the model that I showed you an excerpt from earlier. Law instructor. There's the impl ID, the full name, the mail. We've defined how it'll appear. Whenever I create something called admin here, this enables the admin interface for this table. I can filter on full name, and I can search the full name field just by putting this stuff in. I'm ordering by full name. That's law instructors. Okay, here's law students. Okay, impl ID, full name, mail, net ID, career. Our PeopleSoft has an issue with people who are in law and theology. Or law and business. Again, same sorts of things. Class times, we're playing around with adding in our class schedules. We haven't implemented that yet. All right, let's get to the one that we kind of would be more interesting. In here, all right. There's a relationship, right, between students, classes, and faculty. Right? A student can be in many classes, and we can have multiple instructors teaching the same class. The way that you deal with that in Django is really very elegant. Okay? Right here we say students equals models, many-to-many field, law student, comma, there's a filter. That has to do with the way it's displayed in the back end. The many-to-many field is law student versus students in law class. Instructors, many-to-many field versus law instructor, again inside the law class module. This will generate the intermediate tables that manage the many-to-many links in those 2 lines. Very nice. What I want to show you, partly because I think this is sort of, let me go here. When I go to Spring Away, and this is the style sheet I didn't use. Oh, this is good. I think you guys can see this. This is the administrative backend that came for free with Django. Okay, we didn't do anything at all to create this. When I was doing my models, you just saw that little glimpse of the models, the plumbing there. We saw classes, law instructors, law students, and class times. Okay? So now if I go to a class, and we're going to pick out Admiralty Law. Okay. Gigantic bonus here. Again, keep in mind, I didn't leverage any of this because I want to pull directly from PeopleSoft. But think of all those applications where you are going to have to manage the local data and the local relationships. We can add here are the students that are already in the class. I'm sorry, I get it wrong every time. Here are the students that are already in the class, and we can add other students from our entire list of 700 or so to that. We can also add additional instructors to it. Here is the current instructor, David Biederman. This back end with no work and no thinking about it at all is pretty valuable. If you do date fields, you get a little date widget. If you do an email field, remember back, and this would have been another kind of a follow-on in the discussion about why not do SQL initially. I defined one of those fields as an email field. Well, in most database engines, that's not a type. That's not a data type. When you define an email field, what that's saying is whenever somebody enters something up here, enforce some constraints on the kind of data that goes in. And we have, Django provides things like email fields, image fields, file fields, phone number fields, things like that, and then hooks for you to write additional validators. For example, if you have a local ID field that's always formatted in a certain way or things like that. You can do that. And then you define that as a type in your class. In the database, it's just going to be defined as a varchar, whatever, 25. But all of the framework around it will be built so that it requires it validates every time. The other thing that's nice that you get in the admin interface is the ability to add users and groups on the fly who can do different things, granular permissions, rollback, history, things like that. All of these things are nice things to have if you've got a back-end data entry task. Recent actions, you can see some of the things that I was fooling with whenever I was fooling with this. So this is the back-end data view of the site. Okay, these are all the classes in that models thing. And again, oh, sorry. All right. This is what a Django app looks like. We have the basic init stuff. You've got the models definition I just showed you, the URLs that are going to map functions to URLs, and then views. Views is the largest portion of this by far. And I'll give you a view of this. We import a bunch of libraries that come with Django, things like mail or requiring the authentication, stuff like that. I'm eventually going to generate these class lists as PDFs, and so I've imported the PDF gen library from Report Lab. This is we use, well, for our testing software. Come down a little bit. All right. On the law class one, you see that we've got a request and we have a class ID. So you clicked on a link and there's an ID and the overall HTTP request. You're going to get that particular object. Again, map this to SQL. Select where ID equals, blah. Then you're going to return the render to response Spring 08 class.html, passing this dictionary that you got back from the database. And then you've got a decorator there, the law class login required, which basically everything is wrapped in that. So Spring 08 /class.html is the template for describing a class, for listing a class. Sorry, class.html. Okay. And here is the whole front page that you all saw in the template language. Here are the available actions. Here are the instructors. You see these very simple looping constructs inside the template language. Then we come on down. You have the actions. For student in law class dot students dot all, which means it's following this relationship. There's a, ooh, that was nasty. I don't know how that table snuck in there. That was me. Then we throw up their photos and so on. It goes from there. This template for displaying that whole front page is about 46 lines. All right, and I'm sure that the idea of separating a lot of this stuff is also really appealing, of course. All right. All right. Let me talk about some resources here. DjangoProject.com is the main project page. One of the things that I think has handicapped Django's wider adoption of Django is that they've not been at a 1.0 product. They are at the official version is the official version is 0.97 or something now. They will release 1.0 in early September. So 1.0 will be released in early September. But the Django Project website is, again, it's just terrific. I mean, the community around this set of software is a really nice community. I mean, it's sort of a welcoming group of people. Other link that I wanted to show you is the Django book. On to the book. For example, when we were talking about the template system, here's what the book looks like. Here are the comments that pop up when you're looking at the book, that sort of thing, which I find really helpful. And Django Snippets is an online repository of Django code to solve particular tasks. Okay, and then the biggie, and the kind of the thing that's out there that's really interesting is Google App Engine. Google App Engine is a free, scalable applications platform that will scale up to meet pretty substantial needs in terms of your address book or whatever. It's Django. It incorporates Django inside it because Google has some unique requirements with regard to the way their databases work in order for them to scale. It's not a traditional SQL database. So the back-end database driving Google App Engine is not SQL. It's GSQL, GQL. It's we own the world. We'll call it whatever we want. I don't know, whatever it is. But it comes with cute presenters and stuff.
Hi, I'm Fred Slackman, software engineer on the Google App Engine. App Engine enables developers to build web applications on Google's infrastructure. I'm here today to show you how to quickly build a guestbook application using App Engine.
Right.
Let's get started.
No, let's not.
First, I'll create a directory for my new application.
Okay. Take a look at this. If the stuff that I've been doing seems a little too black screen and just not quite right, what's coming around Google App Engine looks really interesting. And Rich is already an App Engine developer, right? Oh yes, he's a master certified App Engine developer.
In the tutorial.
So Rich is out front on that one. But it does look really interesting. I love the fact that they coded everything in App Engine in Python. I think it'll be an interesting test of scalability. All the Django stuff is there. The Django template language, even if you're not interested in Django, the Django template language can be pulled out and used in other projects separately. And it's a lot of fun. I find it less constraining than Cheetah or some of the other template language frameworks that I've looked at. That's it, and we've got a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
With Python, I'm trying to get my hands around this. When I'm working in, say, PHP or ASP or something like that, you'll code your HTML, and then when you want to input data, you'll just sort of, write a little bit of code in between your HTML to have it display.
But doesn't that make you feel dirty?
It gets the job done,
I know, in Python you got to open up all these little files.
Well, I saw like in your, I guess it was the class.html file that you had there. It looked like you were doing something similar to that, but if you were just to pull up that class.html, it wouldn't show anything, would it? It has to be invoked or something by another file, correct?
No, it absolutely does. That's pretty core. Actually, that's in the first few pages of their book. They talk about old styles and bear with me one second. Different approaches to this. There's a lot in here. I mean, there's a ton of stuff in here, and I think language purists could argue that when you're adding all these additional validation constraints on top of what's basically a database definition, you're doing a little code in the model, but it's nothing like what you would see in the traditional, and that's not limited to PHP. I mean, you could do it in Perl or any, ASP is a good example. I mean, you could do it in any language, where you could mix the output and the logic of the thing. But one of the really nice, if you start looking at that constraint as a good thing rather than a bad thing, theoretically, the only thing that my web designer would need to know would be the template language and the names of my models. So I could give them, we have a model that has these members and these attributes. Go design templates. So theoretically, that's all they have to know. The other really nice thing about that, and we've all done this, where you copy and paste, or just copy a file and then strip out all the HTML and poke in your for loops that build up a CSV file so that they can load it into an Excel spreadsheet. And that's not ideal. But I mean, we all do that because you can do cut and paste in your editor. But one of the things it's trying to do is get you to not need to do that, where you write one little file that manages the XML version of your data, one file that manages the PDF or the CSV or the HTML version. But the other way of looking at that, this is not the kind of thing where you install it and 2 minutes later you've got a little Hello World app. Unlike with with anybody's experience with PHP or with a lot of other programming languages, you've got something up in the browser, 10 seconds after typing it, and it's very satisfying. And so you have to configure, there are 4 separate files that are going to need to be configured properly before you see the end result application. But I think that's also true in the newer PHP frameworks. But I don't know, I don't do PHPs. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much for coming. I want to say thanks to the CALI organizers, and this has just been a great conference. It's a really nice space, and it's just been a really nice conference. And I didn't go last year. It's just been really nice to be back. So anyway, thank you all.
I have unsolicited advice for you. I thought I saw a social security number